My three daughters sent a message in the family group. We think it's time to step away from the company now. You have grown quite unwise. My wife gave a thumbs up in support of them. So I replied, understood. Come to the office tomorrow for the handing over. The next morning, what happened was rather unexpected. Would you take a wild guess before you continue the story? What do you think I'd do to them? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel to support us. It will be great to know in the comments section where you are listening from. Now let me tell you everything that happened. I was never the kind of man who craved applause. I never needed a crowd to cheer me on or a gold plaque to tell me I'd made it. What I needed, what drove me, was simple: stability. I wanted to know my family would never struggle the way I did growing up. I built my company with my bare hands, stacking one risk on top of another like bricks until I had something solid to stand on. It started in a single rented unit with secondhand equipment and more debt than confidence. I'd come home smelling like oil and fatigue, but my girls were waiting at the door, tiny hands reaching up, eyes sparkling, calling me daddy like I was a king. And my wife, Sonia, she was quieter then, gentler. Back when we still shared a bed of dreams instead of one of calculations and silent dinners. Everything I did for them. Every contract I fought for, every sleepless night analyzing cash flow and employee payroll, it was all to make sure they'd never have to hustle for rent or ration out groceries. I thought they knew that. I truly believed that beneath all the comfort and privilege, they understood the price I paid to give them that life. But somewhere along the way, the story shifted, and I didn't notice the rewrite until it was too late. As the business grew, so did their expectations. I remember when I first handed them roles in the company. Kayla, my oldest, was sharp with numbers and had a head for operations. Mariah was charming, good with people, ideal for managing client relationships. And Brielle, my youngest, had a knack for marketing, her social media skills turning campaigns viral in ways I never could have imagined. I thought I was preparing them to inherit, not just a company, but a legacy. What I didn't realize was that they weren't learning stewardship. They were learning entitlement. They started walking through the halls like they owned the place, and maybe in some twisted way, they believed they did. After all, everything they had ever known came from it. And maybe Sonia fueled that narrative more than I understood. She'd sit at the head of the dinner table and smile quietly as they rolled their eyes at my decisions. She rarely defended me when they pushed back in meetings. She became their ally, not mine. And I, the man who once built an empire with his own two hands, became the old man who doesn't get it anymore. The message came on a Tuesday afternoon, ordinary in every way except for what it carried. I was in the office, sipping a lukewarm coffee, when the family group chat buzzed. I opened it, expecting a meme or a dinner plan. Maybe even Brielle complaining about the new office paint colors. Instead, I saw Kayla's name above a block of text that sent a cold wave through my chest. We think it's time to step away from the company now. You have grown quite unwise. The words were clean, sanitized of emotion, like a press release announcing the retirement of a public figure. My fingers trembled slightly as I reread it, not because of what it said, but because of who co-signed it. Within seconds, Sonia had reacted with a thumbs up. That damn emoji. Years of sacrifice, decades of building something from nothing, reduced to a single pixelated thumb of approval at my removal. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at it. Sat back in my chair and listened to the sound of the HVAC system humming like nothing had happened. But inside, something cracked. Not loudly, but deep, quiet, final. I typed my reply slowly, deliberately. Understood. Come to the office tomorrow for your letter. That was it. No argument. No begging. No lecture about respect or betrayal. Just a short sentence and a period sharp enough to draw blood. I hit send and sat there, watching the message land like a bomb in silence. For the first time in a long time, I didn't care how it would be received. I didn't care about their feelings or if Sonia would scold me later behind closed doors. They had made their move, and now it was my turn. They had mistaken my love for weakness, my age for incompetence. But what they failed to remember, what they never truly understood, was that this company didn't fall into my lap. It wasn't gifted to me by some benevolent relative or conjured out of thin air. I bled for it. And if they thought they could stage some polite coup and take it from me without consequence, they were about to learn that I didn't raise daughters. I raised opportunists. And I had finally seen them clearly. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, remembering all the times I bailed them out. When Kayla overdrafted her college account and called crying. When Mariah crashed her car and I covered the deductible and repairs without question. When Brielle failed her marketing internship and I gave her a role in the company to protect her pride. And Sonia, how many times had I let her override me with the girls, convincing myself it was just maternal instinct and not manipulation? I gave them everything. More than they earned, more than they appreciated. And now they wanted to discard me like yesterday's strategy memo. I kept replaying that thumbs up. It haunted me more than the actual message. It was Sonia's way of saying she'd picked her side, and it wasn't mine. But that was fine. I'd finally accepted that I was standing alone, and I would handle it alone. The next morning would be different. Not just in terms of business, but in terms of power. They had crossed a line they couldn't walk back. And while they slept soundly, thinking they'd won some unspoken war, I was preparing for battle. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't scream into the void asking why my own family had turned on me. No, I logged into the bank systems and revoked every single access point they had. I changed passwords, redirected notifications, and scheduled a call with legal to prepare the dismissal letters. If they wanted to remove me, they'd better be ready to leave empty-handed. Because they hadn't just poked the bear, they'd try to cage him. And I wasn't going to be caged by the very people I fed. The following morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The sun hadn't even crested the skyline, but I was already inside my corner office, sleeves rolled, heart cold. I sat in the same leather chair I'd occupied for nearly 2 decades, yet it felt different now, like a throne after betrayal. There was no comfort in familiarity anymore. Every pen on my desk, every plaque on the wall, every photo of smiling daughters at company holiday parties, they all mocked me. I had raised 3 girls who smiled wide for the camera, but sharpened knives behind closed doors. And now, they were coming. I knew they'd show up, not out of guilt or humility, but curiosity. They want to know what I meant by your letter, but they had no idea they were walking into the consequence of their own arrogance. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to scold. All I had to do was take back the one thing they valued more than family: control. I saw them arrive one by one on the security monitor, each walking in with that casual, self-assured stride they'd adopted in recent years. Kayla, in her usual stiff blazer, already tapping at her phone before she even reached the elevator. Mariah, heels clacking, fake smile plastered on like she was arriving for a photo shoot. And Brielle, the youngest and most unfiltered, had the nerve to bring a coffee like this was just another morning meeting. None of them looked nervous. That told me everything. They thought this was going to be a conversation. They expected a back and forth, maybe even a negotiation. But what they didn't know was that the discussion ended the moment they tried to humiliate me in that group chat. This wasn't a boardroom debate. This was a reckoning. They didn't even greet me when they walked in. Kayla opened with, "So, what exactly does letter mean? Are you finally retiring, or just trying to guilt trip us again?" The way she said guilt trip made my hands clench under the desk. I studied her face, and for a moment, I didn't see my daughter. I saw a stranger who had learned how to mimic love when it served her and discard it when it didn't. I handed her a sealed envelope and did the same for Mariah and Brielle. They exchanged glances, eyebrows raised, and Kayla was the first to open hers. Her eyes scanned the page quickly. She was always the fastest reader, and then her face froze. "You're terminating us?" she said, voice flat but rising. Mariah's mouth opened slightly, and Brielle dropped her coffee, splashing it across the floor without even noticing. I didn't answer. I just leaned back and looked at each of them like a father who had finally, irrevocably, stopped trying to fix what was broken. "What the hell is this?" Mariah snapped, waving the letter. "You're seriously firing your own daughters?" Her voice cracked at the end, not with sadness, but disbelief. As if the idea that I might finally say no was a foreign language. Brielle stepped forward, trying a softer angle. "Dad, come on. We were just being honest." That message wasn't. It was exactly what it sounded like. I cut in. My voice was calm, cold, final. You tried to push me out of my own company. You undermined me in front of my wife, in front of each other. You thought a group message could do what 20 years of sweat couldn't. So yes, this is what you get. Effective immediately. None of you are employees. None of you have access. You're done here. They started speaking at once. Kayla demanding an explanation. Mariah threatening legal action. Brielle trying to spin it all as a misunderstanding. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I simply reached for the folder on my desk, pulled out the printouts of revoked access confirmations, and slid them across the table. Your logins are gone. Your bank privileges are revoked. And your phones won't work to call anyone for reinstatement because I've blocked every one of your numbers. That shut them up. For a brief, glorious moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner and the shallow breathing of three daughters who realized they'd just lost everything they took for granted. I dismissed them with a nod. You can see yourselves out. Kayla lingered for a moment longer, as if she couldn't quite believe this was real. I watched her jaw clench. She wasn't used to losing. You'll regret this, she muttered, grabbing her bag and storming out. Mariah didn't even look at me, just followed behind her sister like a ghost. Brielle was the last to leave. She hesitated at the door and turned back, eyes glossy, voice small. You didn't even give us a chance to explain. I stared at her and said, you explained everything when you sent that message. You were clear. And then she was gone. I should have felt something after they left. Relief, sadness, vindication. But all I felt was empty. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I realized how long I'd waited to be free of this burden. Loving them had become a full-time job with no return on investment. It wasn't love anymore. It was obligation, expectation, manipulation. And I was done. 2 hours later, the real storm began. Missed calls. Voicemails. Hundreds of them. They pinged relentlessly, trying every number, every angle, every guilt trip. I sat back and watched the chaos unfold like a man watching a house fire from a safe distance. Then came the voice note. From Kayla, of course. I played it once, just once, and it was all I needed to hear. Her voice was wild, enraged, full of venom. You're out of your mind. You can't do this. We're your children. You think you're punishing us, but you're just burning your own legacy to the ground. I deleted it and blocked the number. Then I opened the family group chat and typed a message I should have sent years ago. I'm done with all of you. You don't get to disrespect me, try to replace me, and still expect to eat from my table. You don't deserve anything from me. Not my company, not my accounts, not my forgiveness. I hit send and closed the app. I stood by the window for a long while, staring at the city I helped build piece by piece. It was all still mine. Every floor tile, every contract, every sacrifice, it still belonged to me. And for the first time in years, so did my piece. They didn't take it well. That much was obvious within the first 20 minutes of me blocking their bank access. What I had underestimated was just how quickly panic would replace their arrogance. The call started a little before 9 a.m., first from Kayla's assistant, then from a private number I knew belonged to Mariah's burner phone, the one she used for side projects I had long since stopped asking about. When that didn't work, Brielle started messaging the office line through the receptionist, who looked up at me with wide eyes as the phones rang nonstop. I told her calmly, tell them I'm unavailable. For the rest of their lives, if necessary. She chuckled nervously, unsure if I was joking. I wasn't. What I had done the night before wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't some impulsive lashing out. It was the final move in a game they had been playing for years, and now they were facing checkmate. By 10 a.m., I had 24 missed calls and 6 voicemails, each more frantic than the last. I didn't listen to them at first. I just watched the numbers roll in like a scoreboard tallying regret. The group chat, which had been so smug the day before, was now a battlefield of pleas, accusations, and thinly veiled threats. Mariah, you're making a mistake. We can fix this if you just talk to us. Kayla, you're acting emotionally, not logically. This is about governance, not betrayal. Brielle didn't write much, just sent question marks, followed by please pick up. I didn't mean for this. That one stung a little, but I reminded myself that silence had its own kind of power. I had spent too many years responding to every crisis they created, always being the one to smooth things over. Not this time. This time, they would sit in the discomfort they so casually dropped into my lap. The turning point came just after noon when Kayla, true to form, decided that if a call couldn't move me, a voice note might. I sat at my desk, coffee in hand, when it arrived. A red bubble with her name and a timestamp. I debated for a moment whether I even wanted to hear her voice, but something in me needed to. Not out of weakness, out of closure. I hit play, and what came through my speaker wasn't a plea. It wasn't an apology. It was fury. Pure, unfiltered, juvenile fury. "You had no right," she screamed. "You think you're teaching us a lesson, but you're just proving how unstable you've become. Who the hell cuts off their own children from their legacy? You're bitter and controlling, and guess what? Everyone's going to know how messed up you really are. You've officially lost us. Congratulations." There was a moment of silence at the end, like she expected me to pause and reflect. Instead, I laughed. Quietly, bitterly, the kind of laugh that doesn't come from amusement, but from a realization so sharp it could bleed. I had spent so much time blaming myself. Maybe I was too stern, too controlling, too old-fashioned. But that voice note stripped away every illusion. They weren't upset because they were hurt. They were upset because they lost access. This wasn't about love. It was about control. And when I took that from them, they unraveled. That voicemail was the cleanest truth I'd heard in years. I didn't respond. I didn't explain. I didn't give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd been heard. I opened my contacts, found each of their names, and blocked them. All three. I even blocked Sonia, because I knew the next call would come from her, playing mediator, trying to guilt me into reversing course. But I had already reversed course too many times. I had enabled this behavior, fed it, nurtured it even, believing that if I just gave a little more, they'd finally understand. But they never did. And now, they wouldn't have the chance. I walked down the hall to my legal team's office and confirmed the letters had been sent via email as well, just in case they tried to claim they hadn't officially received anything. My attorney, a sharp woman named Denise who'd been with me for over a decade, looked at me and said, "You sure you're ready for what's coming next?" I nodded. They think they're entitled to everything I've built. I'm just reminding them who built it. Denise didn't smile. She knew this wasn't a victory march. It was a necessary cut. And clean cuts, while healing faster, always sting the most. That afternoon, I returned to my office and sat in the silence. The phones had stopped ringing. The chat was quiet. It felt like the eye of a hurricane, still, unsettling, but peaceful in its own eerie way. I looked around at the pictures still hanging, photos of them at company parties, framed moments of false harmony. I took them down one by one, not out of anger, out of truth. Those smiles belonged to people I no longer knew, people who saw my love as leverage and my success as currency. I placed the frames in a box and slid it into the cabinet, locking it shut. For the first time in years, I felt something return to me. Not joy, not quite, but clarity. I had spent so long carrying everyone else's expectations that I forgot what it felt like to stand on my own. To remember that I am not just a father or a husband or a founder. I am a man who gave everything, and when that wasn't enough, they tried to take even more. But I had drawn the line now, not in sand, but in stone. I left the office early that day, drove home with the windows down, letting the autumn wind whip through the car like a cleansing. The house was quiet when I walked in. Sonia was out, probably with one of the girls, trying to make sense of everything. I didn't wait up. I didn't care what spin they were already crafting. Let them tell their version. I had mine. And unlike theirs, it was rooted in sacrifice, not strategy. Before bed, I opened my laptop one last time and typed a message to my board. Simple, clear, confident. Effective immediately, I will continue as CEO and sole decision maker. The transition plan involving family members has been terminated. We move forward cleanly, professionally, and without internal interference. I sent it, closed the laptop, and finally exhaled. They wanted to control the kingdom. But they forgot. I was the one who built it. And I just took the crown back. The fallout didn't come in flames. It came in whispers. That's what surprised me. I expected confrontation, screaming, maybe even legal threats to come barreling through my office doors. But instead, it started with subtle shifts. A cold silence from Sonia at home. A new tension in the office air. People weren't outright accusing me of anything, but they were watching, judging. The same people who had once praised my daughters as the future of the company now walked on eggshells around me, unsure whether I had lost my mind or finally found my backbone. And I didn't blame them. Family drama has a way of seeping into everything, even the hallways of a company supposedly built on professionalism and discipline. But this wasn't just office gossip. This was a full-blown rupture, and I was the man who had detonated the charges. Sonia didn't say a word the first night. She came home late, avoiding eye contact, made herself a silent dinner, and went straight to bed without a single question. That silence spoke louder than any argument ever could. It was an accusation, not of betrayal, but of audacity. In her eyes, I had crossed a sacred line, cutting off the girls, blocking their access, and dismissing them without a family discussion. But what she'd refused to acknowledge for years, was that the only reason this whole mess had reached such a boiling point was because we'd had too many discussions and not enough decisions. I had been compromising for too long, bending so far backward that I could barely stand upright anymore. She thought my silence at the dinner table was apathy. It wasn't. It was restraint. And now that it was gone, I could finally breathe, even if that breath came with the cold sting of isolation. It took less than 48 hours before the extended family started circling like vultures. My brother called first, which shocked me. He usually stayed out of anything that smelled like conflict. "Just wanted to check in," he said, voice light, too casual to be sincere. "Heard some rumors." I told him plainly, if the rumors are that I fired my daughters and blocked them from the company, they're true. He hesitated. "That's big, man. You sure you're okay?" I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd that people were more concerned about my stability than about the years of manipulation I'd endured. "I'm better than I've been in years," I said. And that was the truth. Brutal, but honest. Soon after, Sonia's sister texted. Then an old family friend. Then the messages started rolling in from mutual contacts. People pretending to be concerned, but clearly fishing for gossip. "Heard the girls are out. That's gotta be tough. Wow, you guys always seem so close. What happened? Hope you're not doing anything you'll regret." I responded to none of them. I didn't need the sympathy of people who'd never stepped foot in my shoes. I didn't need validation. What I needed was space to rebuild, reframe, and recover from the years of emotional erosion that had turned my home into a negotiation table and my office into a war zone. Let them speculate. Let them take sides. I wasn't playing for the crowd anymore. The only person who approached me with genuine clarity was Carl, my longtime operations manager. He'd seen the family dynamics up close, watched the girls grow from interns to tyrants, always polite on the surface, but never truly blind to their entitlement. He knocked on my door late one afternoon, shut it behind him, and said, "I know this isn't any of my business, but I think you did the right thing." I looked up from my desk, genuinely startled. "You do?" He nodded. "They stopped listening to you years ago. They were running this place like it was theirs, not like it was something you built for all of us. It was only a matter of time." That small moment of validation carried more weight than all the years of fake smiles and forced family dinners. I thanked him sincerely, and he said, "You gave them more chances than most people get. Don't forget that." And I wouldn't. That weekend, I found myself sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at an untouched breakfast while Sonia stood at the counter, scrolling through her phone, silent. Finally, she spoke. "They're devastated, you know." I nodded. "They should be." She turned to me, eyes narrowing. "They're your daughters, not your employees." I met her gaze. Then maybe they should have remembered that before trying to fire me in a group chat. That landed hard. She flinched, but didn't argue. She knew I was right, even if she didn't want to admit it. She'd watched them twist my authority for years, whispering behind doors, rolling their eyes at family events, treating me like some outdated relic while she sat there, silently complicit. I had waited for her to speak up, to pull them aside and remind them who I was. Not just their father, but the man who paid for their dreams. She never did. "I just wish you'd handled it differently," she said after a long pause. I shrugged. "So do I. I wish they'd never forced my hand." And with that, the conversation ended. There was no grand reconciliation, no tears, no hugs. Just two people in a kitchen, finally acknowledging the fracture they'd both helped create. The days that followed were quiet. No more calls. No more messages. The girls had gone silent, not because they'd accepted my decision, but because they were regrouping. I knew my daughters. They were planners, schemers, survivors. This wasn't over. They'd try to come at me from another angle, maybe through lawyers, maybe through the court of public opinion. But I was ready. I had nothing left to lose with them. The bridge was burned, and I wasn't interested in rebuilding it. If they wanted to fight, they'd find a different battlefield. I had reclaimed my company, my boundaries, and my peace. They weren't getting any of that back. That week, I changed my will. Removed their names from the succession plan. Replaced them with a trust that would manage everything after I was gone, ensuring the business would be led by people who respected what it stood for. Not just profit, but principle. I called Denise to finalize the papers, and when she asked, "Are you absolutely sure?" I said, without hesitation, more than I've ever been about anything. And I meant it. I wasn't cutting them out to be cruel. I was cutting them out to survive. Some people will call me heartless. Others will say I acted out of ego or pride. Let them. I know the truth. I didn't abandon my daughters. I protected myself from them. From the version of them they chose to become. The version that saw me not as a father or a mentor, but as an obstacle. And I was done being in their way. It hit me the following Monday morning, as I walked through the empty executive floor, that peace and power often come with the same price: isolation. The hallway was quiet in a way it hadn't been for years. No heels clicking in a rush. No Mariah laughing too loudly on a client call. No Brielle shouting down the hall for someone to fix her computer again. Their absence should have felt like a wound, but instead it felt like fresh air, sharp, clean, maybe a little lonely, but pure. I stood in front of their old offices and took one last look at the nameplates that still hung on the doors. I didn't remove them right away. Not because I had second thoughts, but because I wanted to remember what they used to be before they became everything I now regretted. Liabilities and lipstick, entitlement and expensive heels. Later that morning, Carl came into my office with a manila envelope and a frown that said more than his words ever could. "They've started calling suppliers," he said, setting the folder down on my desk. "Telling them the company's going through a transition, trying to get information." I didn't need to ask who they were. I nodded slowly and opened the folder, scanning emails and memos, little fires, all of them, nothing I couldn't put out. But that wasn't the point. They weren't trying to run a campaign of redemption. They were trying to sabotage what they no longer controlled. If they couldn't wear the crown, they'd rather melt it. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. "Let them try," I said. "They've already shown me who they are. This just confirms it." What stung wasn't their betrayal. It was how quickly they revealed their true priorities. Not once since the fallout had any of them reached out to say, "I'm sorry." Not once had they expressed regret, or sadness, or even confusion. All their messages, their backdoor inquiries, their attempts to stir unrest among clients and staff. Every move was about power, image, and control. Not one action reflected a daughter grieving the rupture of a family bond. No one had said, "Dad, are you okay?" And that told me everything I needed to know. They didn't miss me. They missed access. To the money. To the influence. To the privilege of being able to say, "My father owns this company." I spent that afternoon digging through old files, searching for the original photos we used in their employee profiles. I found them easily, headshots we took years ago when they first joined the company full-time. Their faces were younger then, softer, less guarded. And mine, in those pictures, looked proud. I'd believed in them. I really had. I thought that bringing them into the company would mean passing on more than wealth. I thought I was passing on wisdom, values, legacy. I stared at those photos for a long time before I placed them in a folder marked archive. I wasn't erasing history. I was simply closing the chapter on a story I'd been lying to myself about for far too long. That night, I drove home slowly, letting the radio fill the silence with background noise I didn't have to think about. Sonia wasn't home again. I wasn't surprised. We hadn't spoken since our brief conversation in the kitchen, and the air between us had solidified into something brittle, fragile, and too easy to crack. When I entered the house, I found an envelope on the dining table with my name on it. Her handwriting. Inside was a short letter, 3 paragraphs, no apology. She wasn't leaving yet, but she needed space. She was going to stay with her sister for a while. No timeline, no conversation, just distance. I folded the letter and placed it in my drawer next to the copy of my updated will. There was nothing left to say. The next morning, I got a call from Gloria, my former assistant. She'd retired 2 years ago, but still kept in touch. "I've been hearing things," she said cautiously, from the old guard. "People think the company's in crisis." I smiled grimly. "That's because they're listening to my daughters." Gloria hesitated, then asked, "Can I say something you might not want to hear?" I nodded. "Always." She paused, then said, "You spent so many years trying to protect them, you forgot to protect yourself. But I'm glad you finally did." That was the thing about Gloria. She never sugarcoated the truth. And I needed that now more than ever. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. The truth was, I'd been shielding them from consequences their entire lives. When Kayla failed her CPA exams, I paid for private tutoring and called in a favor to get her a second interview. When Mariah's boyfriend scammed money from a company event budget, I covered it and never told anyone. When Brielle almost lost us a huge client because she forgot to submit the final campaign, I stepped in and smoothed it over. They never saw those things as protection. They saw them as expected, as routine. And that was the monster I helped create. Not because I was careless, but because I loved them. And love, in the hands of the entitled, becomes a weapon. They hadn't cherished the business. They hadn't even cherished me. What they cherished was access to the accounts, to the power, to the ability to say they were part of something successful without having to carry its weight. On Thursday, I called an all-hands meeting. I stood in front of the team, dozens of employees who'd watched this family unravel from their cubicles, and I told them the truth. There's no scandal, no succession war, just a decision, a long overdue one. This company will continue to operate under my leadership. We're not unstable. We're just finally free of distraction. They listened quietly, respectfully. A few nodded. One even clapped, softly. That was enough. I didn't need cheers. I needed alignment. After the meeting, Carl came by again. "There's a rumor," he said, "that they're considering a press interview. Some tell-all piece about the toxic work environment here." I laughed, genuinely this time. "Let them tell it," I said. "Let them have the stage. It's the only thing they've ever truly earned." Carl didn't press the issue. He knew I was done playing defense. Let the world hear their version. I'd survived worse. The silence stretched into weeks. No more voicemails. No more group messages. No last-ditch effort to reconcile. At first, I thought maybe they'd finally accepted it, that I had taken everything back and wasn't bluffing. But deep down, I knew better. They were quiet not because they were sorry, but because they were plotting. That's how they operated. Wait for the dust to settle, then reappear with rehearsed apologies and calculated charm, hoping I'd lower my guard again. I didn't. I couldn't. Some bridges, once burned, become ash in the wind, and there's no reconstructing ash. The only thing left to do is walk forward without looking back. Each morning, I showed up to the office with the same resolve. I reviewed numbers, held meetings, pushed forward. At first, some clients hesitated, asking subtle questions about the family transition, trying to assess the company's stability. But when they saw that operations didn't falter, that invoices still processed, that service remained impeccable, they stopped asking. In fact, a few even expressed relief. "Things seem tighter now," one longtime client observed. "More focused." And that was exactly it. Without the weight of appeasement and ego management, the business could finally breathe again. I could finally breathe again. And not as someone trying to protect a legacy, but as someone finally protecting himself. But peace, as I'd come to learn, always comes with echoes. One afternoon, I got a call I didn't expect, my mother. We hadn't spoken in months, not since the last family gathering where the girls spent most of the evening in a corner, whispering and snickering while I tried to make small talk with relatives who barely knew me. "They told me what happened," she said, voice tired, not accusatory, but not neutral either. "Are you really cutting them off for good?" I closed my eyes and exhaled. "I didn't cut them off, Mom. I just stopped letting them cut into me." She sighed, the kind of sigh that mothers carry like an heirloom. I just wish it didn't come to this. I did too, but not enough to undo it. Later that evening, Sonia returned home briefly to collect more clothes. She didn't say much, just walked through the house like a stranger who knew where everything was but belonged nowhere. I watched her move through the kitchen, and for a moment, I saw the woman I fell in love with, smart, graceful, strong-willed. But now she was distant, unreachable. I asked her plainly, "Do you think I was wrong?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I think they were wrong first. But you were final." I nodded. That's the only way they understand anything. Finality. Boundaries. The word no. She gathered her things and said, "I don't know what happens next." I said I do. Life goes on. And it would, with or without her. In the weeks that followed, I rewrote everything. Legal documents, ownership structures, succession plans. I put safeguards in place to ensure that even after I was gone, they couldn't worm their way back in. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. They had shown me who they were, and I was finally listening. I appointed Carl as interim successor and began grooming 2 senior managers for future leadership. They weren't family, but they were loyal, grounded, and most importantly, they respected what the company stood for. They didn't see it as an inheritance. They saw it as a responsibility. And that, I realized, was what had been missing all along. One rainy Thursday afternoon, as I was locking up my office, a receptionist handed me an envelope. No return address. Inside was a short note from Brielle. Handwritten. No threats, no manipulation. Just a few shaky lines. "I know I messed up. I just wanted you to know I've been thinking about everything. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say that." I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. I also didn't respond. But I didn't throw it away either. I placed the note in my drawer next to the letter from Sonia and the old photos I couldn't bring myself to toss. Not because I forgave her, but because even the smallest flicker of humanity deserved to be remembered. Not honored, just remembered. The company hit record profits that quarter. It wasn't lost on me. The irony that stripping away what I once believed was essential turned out to be the very thing that allowed us to thrive. I stood in the lobby one morning, watching the team pass through security, greeting each other, laughing, focused. I used to imagine my daughters standing in this space, leading, evolving, carrying the business forward. But now, I didn't feel their absence like a loss. I felt it like clarity. They weren't meant to carry the legacy because they didn't understand it. And maybe that was my greatest mistake, confusing inheritance with identity. Assuming blood would be enough. It wasn't. Now, I live quietly. I work a little less. I sleep a little more. The house is quieter, but not cold. Just still. Sometimes I miss them. Not who they became, but who they were before entitlement hardened their hearts. I miss movie nights. I miss Mariah's sneaking bites from the serving tray before dinner. I miss Kayla arguing over board games. I miss Brielle's awful singing in the shower. But missing someone doesn't mean you invite them back into your life. It means you respect what was and accept what is. If they ever come back, if they ever truly change, I'll still be here. But I won't be the same man waiting at the door with open arms. That version of me died the day they tried to unseat me with a message. The day Sonia gave a thumbs up instead of raising a hand to stop them. That version of me who believed legacy was something you gift, not something you earn. I've learned better. If you've ever had to walk away from people you once would have given everything to, then you understand the pain and the power of setting boundaries. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to cut someone off, even when it hurt? Let's talk about it. And if this story hit home for you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful real-life dramas just like this. Your support helps bring these stories to life. See you soon in the next one.